Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm obviously joined with the great Chief Buckner of Syracuse Police Department and Deputy Chief Derek McGork, and I want to thank them on behalf of my office and on behalf of the citizens of this community for the phenomenal job that SPD did in putting this case together and taking the first step in bringing four defendants to justice. I'm going to discuss the case. The chief and the deputy chief are here not to talk about legislative issues. I'm going to talk about them because this case is a microcosm of what's wrong with New York State right now and needs to be addressed in a very, very serious manner. Let me begin by telling you that this is about the homicide on June 7th of this year at 701 Bellevue Avenue. It involves four defendants. The homicide occurred at approximately 11:21 p.m. 26-year-old victim, Darren Rosa, was standing in front of his house, 701 Bellevue Avenue. As I understand it, Sean, there were a number of family members, young people out there with him, so this was an especially heinous and dangerous situation. Defendant Tayshawn Sampson drives a Nissan past 701 Bellevue Avenue. Atreyu Boykins and Jaden Campbell fire what is believed to be 9 shots from semi-automatic pistols into the crowd. Rosa is struck in the head and is pronounced at the hospital, and it is believed that Rosa was in fact the intended target. Anthony Dowdell is also present in the vehicle at the time of the murder, and based on his actions and complicity, he also has been charged with murder. The group then returns to 912 Park Street, which is the address of Boykins' brother, and the following day, Boykins and Dowdell allegedly poured bleach on the vehicle to attempt to destroy forensic evidence. We nevertheless made efforts to recover forensic evidence from that vehicle, and we will see whether or not those efforts to destroy the evidence were successful or not. These are the four defendants. Take particularly note of the age of the four individuals. Atreyu Boykins, alleged to be one of the shooters, 17. Jaden Campbell, alleged to be one of the shooters, 16. Tayshawn Sampson, 17, the driver, allegedly. And Anthony Dowdell, age 18, the passenger who was involved in stealing the vehicle, joining in the homicide, and also pouring bleach on the vehicle. Now, to put this case in context, back in April of 2017, I stood on this very spot and spoke to many of you who are here today about the insanity of the raise the age legislation. I explained to you that 95% of the juveniles that went through the criminal justice system in Onondaga County walked away from it with absolutely no record whatsoever. Despite that fact, the legislature, in their missionary zeal to become social justice warriors and legislators that ignore the will of the people, decided to pass the raise the age statute. They've also added to that bail reform. And let's see in the next couple of minutes, as I go through this case facts with you, as to how well raise the age and bail reform is working. Charges in the indictment are related to Atreyu Boykins. Again, the 17-year-old. Murder second, possession of a weapon, possession of stolen property, tampering with physical evidence. Boykins is charged in 4 separate incidents. The June 7th murder, which is the subject of the indictments that were reported out today, a July 8th shooting, a July 10th shooting, and most insidiously, a May 19th, 2021 shooting in which he was arrested and let out because of bail reform. Previous case. You may recall this case, the Ryan Williams homicide. Boykins was alleged and admitted to being one of the 3 shooters in that particular case. He made a deal with prosecutors to testify against his 2 co-defendants, and he wound up going to family court. And as you can see, obviously family court had a tremendous impact on him. Boykins reneged on his deal to testify, and we were forced to offer those 2 co-defendants plea bargains in that particular case. Jaden Campbell, again 16 years old, charged with murder in the 2nd degree, possession of a weapon, stolen property, unauthorized use of a vehicle. Here's a glaring example of the success of Raise the Age. Campbell was arrested and indicted for a February 11, 2019 knife point robbery of a 15-year-old. Incredibly, under the Raise the Age legislation, a knife point first-degree robbery does not automatically make one eligible for juvenile court on the third floor. Over our strenuous objection, Mr. Campbell's case was returned to family court. Obviously, I can't tell you what happened there. First of all, I don't know what happened there, but I know that he was out to allegedly kill Mr. Rosa. He was also arrested on February the 27th. You might remember this case. This was a case involving the Solvay Police Department, a weapon that was thrown from the vehicle. And again, thanks to Raise the Age, Mr. Campbell was sent to family court. Now we come to Tayson Sampson, the alleged driver, and I emphasize alleged. All these defendants are presumed innocent at this point of the proceedings. He's 17 years old, charged with the crimes that you see on your screen there. Sampson's current and prior charges. April 19th, 2020, appearance ticket. April 25th, 2020, appearance ticket. April 30th. Released at arraignment, July 5th, 2020, appearance ticket. July 30th. Removed to family court. And by the way, with our consent. So the people that tell you, well, the DA never agrees to anything, they're lying to you. July 31st. Now we object because he's again going to family court a day later. February the 10th of this year, released at arraignment. February the 10th, same date, different charge, released at arraignment. May 11th. Good Lord. Charges in the indictment related allegedly to Anthony Dowdell, co-conspirator. Grand larceny, possession of stolen property, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, and tampering with physical evidence. Mr. Dowdell's other pending charges. Released on his own recognizance, released on his own recognizance, released on his own recognizance, released on his own recognizance. Finally, somebody said bail. No, actually, they didn't set bail. We asked for bail, and he was released on electronic home monitoring just a few days before the homicide. Arrested on July 6th, given an appearance ticket. Arrested July 26th, related to the Rosa homicide, and he's finally held, incredibly enough, even though bail apparently has been set on him. So those are the four individuals. The next time a legislator tells you that the proudest vote she ever made was to raise the age and to vote for bail reform, show her this PowerPoint and ask her if she still is proud of that vote. This is what happens to juvenile gun arrests here in Onondaga County. 17 pled in criminal court, 10 pending in criminal court, 6 dismissed in city court, 15 removed to family court over our objection, 18 direct to family court. And what happens to these cases in family court? No petition filed in 2 cases, 1 deemed legally insufficient, 11 outright dismissed. These are possessions of illegal handguns in family court. 9, a 6-month adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, which is essentially the same as a dismissal. 6 put on probation, and a whopping 4 were actually placed at Hillbrook or some other detention center. 2020 versus 2019. Shootings with injuries in the city of Syracuse, up 73%. Homicide by gun violence in the city of Syracuse, up 117%. Increase in the number of homicides overall, 44%. Look, some of you are in the habit of telling me how to do my job, and I don't mind that. I welcome that. I believe in a free press. In fact, I fought for a free press most of my adult life. But there comes a point where it's incumbent upon you to look at what I've just showed you and ask yourselves, as responsible journalists, what kind of society allows this to continue? At what point does someone simply say, we made a mistake, we need to go back to the table, we need to sit down with reasonable, forward-thinking prosecutors, criminal defense lawyers, and judges, and get some discretion back to the judges to get these numbers under control. Because don't tell me that these policies are helping poor people and people of color. They're not. They're killing poor people and people of color. Now, I want to divide this into two sections, but I want to give the chief and the deputy chief an opportunity to speak to you, because I want to show you, when they're done, what's next on the wish list of our progressive social justice warriors in Albany. So first, let me turn it over to Chief Buckner.
Bill, thank you. I just want to add that it's obvious that we've seen a significant amount of increase in crime in our city over the past several years, specifically highlighting violent crime. There's no secret that much of that crime involves juveniles, both as suspects and as victims. There's no question that our legislators, our court system have taken steps to attempt to overhaul our criminal justice system, and for many good reasons. But I certainly believe that we've overcorrected. I certainly believe that there's opportunity for improvements for us to get back to the table, to take a look at some of these things, of these unintended consequences that we're seeing. And the one thing that I certainly will echo that Bill said, the very reason that we attempted to correct some of the disparaging adverse impact to black and brown communities is causing issues in those same communities that we were trying to protect. And we certainly have to do a better job of that. This is not a finger-pointing exercise. Certainly as a police department in Syracuse Police, we recognize that we have opportunity for improvement, but we certainly need our citizens to help us to hold other individuals accountable in this criminal justice system, because we certainly can see that we're having some unintended consequences with grave impact on these families, specifically our black and brown community. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
The only thing I would add, guys, is the question's often asked of us. What are you guys doing? What's the police department doing? What's the DA's office doing about the rising crime numbers? I just think it's important to finally take a look at some of the numbers presented by the DA's office here, and specifically the district attorney. There's a lot of work being done by law enforcement, not only at the Syracuse Police Department, but in Central New York. Salve Police Department was referenced up here. There's a ton of good work getting done out here, and despite that, we find ourselves rearresting the same folks and victimizing the same communities over and over again. So the work is being done, but it is time to take a look at what's going on in the way of legislation and ask ourselves if this is really what we had in mind when we passed this legislation in the first place. So.
Thanks, Dirk. And again, I emphasize these 4 defendants are presumed innocent, and they will have their day in court. And with all of this going on, the only thing that I know of specifically that is on the table in Albany regarding further criminal justice reform has nothing to do with correcting the evils that I just showed you, but it has to do with some insidious thing called Elder Parole Act. Now, this would make anyone 55 years of age or older who has served 15 years of a prison sentence to be immediately eligible for parole. So every family in the last 20 years that I've told life without parole means life without parole, I now have to call back and say, I'm sorry, I lied to you. And we were trying to guess the exact number, and we figured it was somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. Rick Trumfield and I put together the following all-star list of 10 people. We stopped at 10. We could have gone to 100. But here are some of the gems that will be immediately eligible for parole or will shortly be eligible for parole if and when this lunacy passes. Billy Blake murdered a police officer, would be eligible for parole immediately. Jeff Cahill, trying to look so mean and bad there in his mugshot with his bald head, who cowardly went into his wife's hospital room while she was recovering from the beating that he inflicted on her and poured cyanide down her throat. Eligible for parole immediately. Nicholas Wiley, a serial killer of women, would be eligible for parole immediately. David Renz, who committed one of the most horrific homicides in the history of this county, raping a child and then murdering the child's mother, and would be parole eligible in a little over a decade. William Wood, who just convicted recently, sentenced to life without parole. I told the families in that case, William Wood will never see the light of day. He would be eligible for parole in less than 20 years. Stephen Piper murdered Jenny Lynn Watson, would be eligible for parole in about a decade. Ryan Lawrence murdered his own child, eligible for parole in 20 years. Saquon Evans, a gutless coward who fired into a van and killed little Rashid Walker, who was trying to extricate himself at 1.5 from a car seat while his mother and father dove under a nearby car for protection, eligible for parole in about 20 years. John Jamelski, eligible for parole immediately. Hubert Mad Dog Allen murdered his 7-year-old son because he was a witness to Mad Dog Allen murdering his mother, eligible for parole immediately. Now, the answer that I get from some of the legislators is, oh, we would never parole people like this. Says who? Where in the statute that I just showed you, Elder Parole Act, does it say if you're a real scumbag, you're not eligible for parole? It doesn't say that because it isn't in the statute. And I have no guarantee, nor does anybody in this community have any guarantee, that those 10 people wouldn't be back on our streets, in some cases immediately and in some cases in just a few short years. This is not what I signed up for. I believe in my heart of hearts that intelligent people go to Albany and they go there to do the right thing. It's time to start doing the right thing. And this is not it. We need you to come back, and we need every legislator in Central New York to be asked this question. What do you intend to do about bail reform and about raise the age to get these numbers back under control and to protect the citizens of the city of Syracuse and the county of Onondaga? I'll take any questions that you have, and so will the chief and deputy chief, I'm sure.
Before bail reform, what would the remedy have been to keep these youngsters from committing violence?
No person, in my judgment, where there is credible, available evidence and demonstrative evidence of guilt, should be allowed out on bail to reoffend when he or she has fired an illegal handgun into the commerce of this community. Plain and simple. That's been a policy I've had for 30 years, and it's worked pretty darn well until this idiotic crap was passed.
The 4 defendants that you just announced a few moments ago, so are any of them being held right now in custody, or?
Pray to God they are. I know that the one not charged with murder is being held, correct, Sean?
All 4 are held right now.
All 4 are held right now. But the law says the judges have to review the bail periodically, consider their age, and consider less restrictive methods of keeping them locked up. I pray to God they get it's important to me, it's important to their lawyers, it's important to everybody. As I said, they are presumed innocent. I want them to get the fairest trial possible, but I don't want them out. Based on what I know, I don't want them out now. Look, the concept of bail is centuries old. Was it abused? Absolutely. I've seen it abused as a defense lawyer. I represented young kids who might be black or brown in a particular community outside of Onondaga County where there aren't a lot of black and brown people, and bail set on them was in no question in my mind was punitive. It was just to send a message and hold them and say, we're telling you, we're telling all your friends who look like you, don't come back here. That was wrong. That was insidious. That should never have been allowed to happen. For 15 years, it may be longer, I have directed my staff. Bail is not punitive for the poor, for nonviolent offenders. And every single judge, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 outliers, and we corrected those mistakes, followed those guidelines. Bail reform was a disaster for Onondaga County because you have judges with decades of experience in the criminal justice system who look at a defendant and they just can't set bail. Look at people say, I read an article the other day where someone said, well, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that bail reform has led to a rise in crime. Good Lord. What evidence? I mean, did Jack Ruby really kill Lee Harvey Oswald in your mind? I think he did. I watched it live. I think it happened. There's no evidence. Tell that to Connie Turi's family, that there's no evidence that bail reform isn't working.
and you believe these four defendants who are just defendants, innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
They are a danger, even though they are so young, to this
40,
community.
48 states, not surprisingly, a judge can say, you know, look, based on the available evidence, based on what are, at this point, allegations, I believe that the interests of the community outweigh the interests of this individual. I believe, as a judge, that this individual possesses a clear and present danger to this community. You know, government has lots of responsibilities. They grow by the day. You know, when I was a kid, they basically, you turned the faucet on, government had an obligation to make clean water come out and pick up our garbage, you know, once a week. And then Skies in Blue used to patrol the neighborhood in Brooklyn and keep us safe. Now we're supposed to clothe you, feed you, educate you, house you, forgive your debts, et cetera, et cetera. What happened to our number one priority of government? To keep us safe. What is it? How many times does a chief have to sit with a family who was in his office crying because their kid went to school and didn't come home for the crime of walking down the street? This kid, Rosa, was out in front of his house celebrating, I don't know what, but it was, I don't know what the weather was like. I suspect it was probably a nice late spring day, and he was with family and friends, and he's shot in the head. For what?
You believe he was the intended target?
We believe he was the intended target.
So no indication on what a motive would be?
Yeah, you know, we do, Mary, but I'm going to hold that for trial. I'll let Sean discuss that with the jury that he picks 7 or 8 months from now.
Going off of what you said, crime has been rising across the country, right? So do you have an explanation for why that is? Could it be because of the pandemic? Is it fair to just be singling out Syracuse or New York City and bail reform when this is a problem across the country?
I've heard, not you, but I've heard people on the left say, well, there's other communities that haven't done bail reform where the murder rate is skyrocketing. Where are those communities? I haven't heard them identify them because I'm not familiar with them. The crime rates are skyrocketing in places with George Soros prosecutors: San Francisco, LA, Orlando, Philadelphia, Boston, St. Louis. All those prosecutors are woke. They don't start by saying, I'm going to keep you safe. They start by saying, here's a list of 20 crimes I'm not going to prosecute. So we welcome immigrants into this community. They set up shops, boutique shops. Some of them are restaurants, some of them are clothing. And then we say, okay, the guy that just ripped off your inventory for the entire week, that's probably going to put you out of business, not going to, you know, force you to go on welfare or something, we're not going to prosecute him because we don't have to. So that's number one. George Soros, who hates this country and unfortunately is a billionaire. Number two, you have the pandemic. Now, I'm not sure how the pandemic led to a rise in shootings when everybody was staying home and not going out. And they say, well, car thefts are down. That's because nobody's leaving their home, idiot, and nobody's driving to the restaurants. Now that we're back on track, car thefts are back up. Guess what? So the pandemic, in my judgment, is responsible for a very small section of the increase in juvenile crime. I think our public policy regarding the pandemic has been a disaster. I mean, today this country is so polarized. To wear a mask means you're a Trump supporter, or you're a Pelosi supporter, but if you don't wear a mask, you're a Trump supporter. Is that how nuts we are today? Because that sounds nuts to me. If somebody tells me that I'm a doctor and I've got a degree and I want to save your life and you should put a mask on, I'll put the freaking mask on. But don't tell me to get vaccinated and I don't have to wear a mask and then renege on that because, you know, 1/100% of people might be being infected. So I think that the tension and the stress that we put on young kids has led, at least in part, to an increase in juvenile crime as a result of the pandemic. I don't think it has anything to do with the increase in gang-related crime. Then you have the incident of George Floyd. If anybody wasn't sick to their stomach of 9 minutes and however many seconds of that maggot sitting on George Floyd's neck while he's begging for his mother and his life, then you're not a human being. But the prosecutor, and in the interest of full disclosure, who's a close friend of mine, who decided to charge George Floyd, had his house vandalized that night. I'm sorry, he made the decision to charge this guy, a cop, with murder. Had never been done before in Minneapolis. And his house gets vandalized. We got problems here. You know, this is bad. This is bad. And I'm telling you, the progressive legislation, you did it, you were well-intentioned, and when you did it, but you got to come back to the table, and the people got to hold you accountable if you don't.
You said you witnessed some of the issues that can happen with bail. Do you believe there is a form of bail reform that looks different than this but accomplishes trying to help the people it was targeted to help?
Absolutely, absolutely. There, you know, for example, if you commit a petty larceny, and I don't care how old you are, you don't have an extensive record. You have no record or a minor record. Why should that person be held on bail? But what if you commit 5 in a row? What if you commit 10? And we have a guy like that. He's a porch pirate. I forget his name, but he literally would follow the Amazon trucks through, you know, the city of Syracuse, drop the truck, just go up, bang, go. Arrest, 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 arrest. At what point does a civilized, you know, society say, okay, well, you know, we know he's presumed innocent on all 10 of these charges, but let's keep this guy incarcerated until we address either punishment or what his problem is. See, that's the problem with progressive prosecutors. The kid goes into the store with a drug habit and steals something, and has no way to address it. Why would he or she? There's no consequences. I'm not going to be prosecuted. A buddy of mine is the DA in a county contiguous to Boston. Got picked up for shoplifting. It's a true story. Looks at the cops. He goes, "Wait a minute, you can't cuff me." The guy goes, "Hey, pal, you're in Essex County. You're not in Suffolk County anymore." "Oh no. Oh, whoops." You know.
The deputy chief or Chief Buckner be able to talk a little bit more about how you brought these 4 defendants that are allegedly involved in this murder, and you mentioned rearresting, and that is an unintended consequence of bail reform that a lot of people are talking about. Has the police department had encounters with all 4 of those defendants before?
I don't want to screw up anybody's case in this office, so I'll be careful. I mean, I think the numbers that the DA put up, that the DA's office prepared, kind of speak for themselves in terms of rearrests. As everybody has pointed out here, including the DA and the chief, nobody's making an argument that the legislation wasn't well intended. I think what we have to look at, though, is, and we've got to ask ourselves, are we getting what we thought we were going to be getting out of all this? And, you know, the DA just mentions arrests for minor offenses, and I think that's important. But even in the cases of minor offenses, you have to remember that for every time somebody's arrested, there's a victim, right? And sometimes that gets left out of all this. A lot of this was geared towards dealing with the disparities in the criminal justice system, and that's important. Everybody up here and every cop understands and every prosecutor understands those are important things to address, but we got to be careful not to address these things at the expense of victims. And that's what's lost in all this, is that for all these arrests and rearrests, there are victims. And there are people who don't need to be victims because there has to be accountability at some point. And I think that's what we're missing here, is accountability. So in this particular case, I can tell you there was a lot of good work done by the Criminal Investigations Division, by the Homicide Squad in particular. A ton of good work done, work that's getting done every day at the Syracuse Police Department with the 360 police officers that we still have. And good work getting done all around the county. We meet every single month. Local partner agencies get together to talk about what can we do to address gun violence. But this is the type of thing that we wrestle with every month. People who are arrested for gun possession and then they're let out, and then rearrested for gun possession and then let out. And it's not a comment on a judge. A lot of the judge's discretion have been removed because of bail reform. But this is the stuff that we have to pay attention to, because there's no reason that this particular person had to be murdered. There's no reason that Connie Torrey had to be murdered. Right? Accountability's got to be part of all this. So we can have talk about criminal justice reform. We're happy to have that conversation, but we have to talk at the same time about victims and accountability.
Well said. And I know you're curious as to how the case came about, and again, Mary, that'll be, you know, revealed at trial. But I can at least say this: that Little Rock's loss and Louisville's loss was our gain. And I can't tell you how proud I am of this guy and how much I enjoy working with him. And he followed my #1 rule, which is you surround yourself with good people. I've been lucky enough to have Rick Trumfield for 30 years, and he's lucky enough to have this guy, Derek McGork, with him. And I thank you all very much for your interest.
And just one more quick question.
Yep.
Is there a problem of where to put juvenile offenders, like Hillbrook? I know there wasn't space
Yeah,
for girls.
one of the things, and you'll remember when they passed to raise the age, there was this panacea of programs and facilities and educational opportunities and job training, all these things. None of that has come to pass. None of it. These, you know, family court, and I emphasize, there's not a criticism of family court. Those judges are outstanding. It is a different universe. It is not prepared to handle what you're looking at there. Hillbrook, for the first time in my institutional memory, actually has to house defendants in other areas of the state. We had to send at least one kid to Buffalo because we have so many juveniles being charged in homicides. That's how bad it is. So housing, yeah, housing is a problem and program. But I'm a firm believer. But by the time someone's 14, 15, 16, the game's over. You know, can you invest a couple of $1 million and change a 16-year-old? Yeah, I suppose you could. I'd be silly if I didn't say that. I've seen people change, so forth and so on. But you got to get these kids. First of all, they got to have families. They got to have family structure. And I don't care what the family looks like. I don't care if it's mom and dad, dad and dad, mom and mom, grandma, grandpa. They got to have structure in their lives. Otherwise, they're going to go to gangs. And it's so obvious. And then, please, you know, let me, you know, Dowdy here will call some, you know, egghead in New York City and say, oh, Mr. Fitzpatrick's argument is so simplistic. Excuse me, I have to get my tea prepared. You know, it's not simplistic. It's a fact. I've been looking at it for, I'm only kidding, Doug. You know, I've been doing it for 40 years. The next time a mom and dad come into my office and say, can we talk to you about our kid who's charged with a serious crime, I'll faint. I'll fall off I'll call Chief Buckner and say, Chief, you got to get over here right away. You're not going to believe what's in my office. Mom and dad are here advocating for their kid. Thanks, guys.
I have two other things quickly to ask
Yeah.
you about.
Ambush questions? Can these guys go?
Yeah, you guys can. You're okay.
My man. Thanks, Rick. Well said.
Thanks, guys.
All right, man. Yes, sir. Thank you.
First, just the decision came out after the investigation into the town of DeWitt police officers' use of force.
Yeah.
At the Walmart incident, seems to be, the chief thinks he was reasonable, in compliance with the law and their policy. What do you make of that video and the determination there?
I like tough questions. I don't mean your question. I mean, I like tough questions. Was this use of force justified or not? That was not a tough question, okay? Did anybody watch the tape from beginning to end? What's wrong with us? I mean, you got 4 teenagers here, allegedly took a kid's life. You got 2 women out shopping who are macing or bear spraying people at a Walmart, for God's sakes. You got children in front of them. I assume that these children are somehow related to these 2 women. And you're behaving like that? And, you know, this is what the officer did. He's exactly trained to do that. Just do that in a forceful way. And people are, oh my God, he punched her. The woman was trying to bite the guy, for God's sakes. So I don't have any problem with Chief Bilodeau's decision. In fact, my office participated in it. So.
And on the upcoming Newlander new trial, how much access do you believe and will the public have to that trial?
Well, they have to have access to it, or it's unconstitutional. I know the system now is, you know, 3 courtrooms. I'm kind of concerned about, you know, this you got to wear more masks mandate, because I'm not trying the case, and I don't think defense counsel is going to want to try the case if everybody's walking around with masks on. I mean, you know, I suffer that burden onto my staff. You know, God bless them. They haven't missed a beat. We're backed up to high heaven. But I'm hoping by that point that we'll have some semblance of normalcy. We're talking late October or mid-October. So.